on invite Sharon à venir à la tribune et on aura en visio Erika Certosino de l'association italienne. Et puis on va rester aussi avec Nathalie pour intervenir aussi, si besoin, mais on va surtout donner la parole à nos amies italiennes et irlandaises.
Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I'm speaking on behalf of AIDEE, the Italian National Association for Developmental Dyspraxia. Actually, I'm not the president of AIDEE. Our president is Dr. Letizia Sabadini, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today. I am the national parents representative and parent coordinator for Tuscany. This role gives me direct contact with families across Italy and the daily challenges they face. In Italy, developmental coordination disorder is still largely under-recognized, and this has a profound impact on life trajectories of both children and adults. So in Italy, families are often left alone to navigate fragmented services because there is no structured national support system. Services vary significantly between regions. Adults with DCD are almost invisible in public services, and support depends largely on the individual initiative and local resources. In Italy, as regards the diagnostic pathway, the diagnosis of dyspraxia is usually carried out by child neuropsychiatrists and psychologists, sometimes neurologists. However, the diagnostic process is heterogeneous and often delayed. Unfortunately, awareness of DCD remains limited among pediatricians and schools. There is a lack of standardized national pathways, and strong territorial disparities continue to exist between regions. As a result, many families receive a diagnosis late and only after a difficult and complex journey. The diagnosis for children or adolescents with DCD and dyspraxia is generally carried out either within public healthcare facilities or in centers accredited by the National Health Service. However, waiting lists in public structures are often quite long. Schools, in turn, typically accept diagnostic certifications only if they come from public or accredited centers. But given the long waiting times, schools may also accept private diagnosis, but only as a provisional measure while waiting for a public or accredited appointment. In other words, private assessments may be accepted temporarily until official public or accredited confirmation is obtained. As for rehabilitation, in Italy, rehabilitation is usually multidisciplinary and may involve neuropsychomotor therapists, speech and language therapists, psychologists, and orthoptists. Anyway, the access to rehabilitation is uneven, characterized by long waiting lists, as I said before, frequent reliance on private care, lack of continuity over time. In public facilities, children are often discharged from rehabilitation programs at a young age, simply due to a lack of available spaces, as priority is given to younger children. Yet, the rehabilitation journey is far from complete and they still need consistent support. And I can personally attest to this because my own daughter was diagnosed at 8 and the local service discharged her stating she was too old to remain in a rehabilitation pathway. As a result, I had to turn to a private center to continue her care. Overall, there is no integrated system connecting health, school and social services. And regarding education, this is one of the most critical areas in Italy, because DCD is not formally included among specific learning disorders, which are protected by the Italian Law 170 of 2010. And this has major consequences, because dyspraxic students can access protection under Law 170 only in case of comorbidity with specific learning disorders. Otherwise, support depends on individual school decisions or on Italian Law 104, which regulates disability in case of comorbidity with other conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, or other conditions. And a major problem concerns teacher training and the actual implementation of personalized teaching. In fact, teachers often have a limited knowledge of DCD. Even when accommodations are formally indicated, they are not always applied or are applied inconsistently. So there is a gap between what is written in educational plan like PDP or PEI. PDP is for students with specific learning disorders, while PEI are for students with a disability. So there's a gap between what is written in these educational plans and what actually happens in the classroom. And for students with DCD, this is particularly critical because their difficulty are often misinterpreted, for example, as a lack of effort. And they require specific and consistent adaptations, which actually don't exist. So as a consequence, there is an equal access to accommodations, an increased academic frustration, a higher risk of failure or disengagement, high frustration and psychological problems. Overall, one of the biggest challenges in Italy is not only teacher training and formation, but teacher compliance in applying personalized teaching strategies. And this happens not only with DCD, but actually also with specific learning disorders. Besides, there are additional challenges such as no specific textbooks for DCD, but students can rely on digital textbooks, PDF materials, concept maps if they have a PDP. In this area, our association actively supports families and schools, provides teacher training initiatives, and develops practical tools and guidelines for schools to help teachers recognize and support students with dyspraxia. We also created a screening questionnaire for early identification, which has been distributed to schools and across Italy. At a university level, things don't work better. The situation becomes even more critical because DCD is unknown. Professors are often even less prepared and less compliant. Accommodations are difficult to obtain and implement. In fact, the use of computers during exams is limited because personal laptops are not allowed, but universities do not provide enough devices for all students. In Italy, universities have offices dedicated to specific learning disorders and disabilities, which aim to safeguard the needs of students. However, despite their efforts, for students with dyspraxia or motor-based learning difficulties, navigating the system remains still very challenging, as I can tell from personal experience, since I have a daughter attending her first year of university, and she's facing a lot of challenges. For example, she struggles to get lecture slides. Sometimes she has difficulty being allowed to record the lectures, even though it should be a right. And she cannot easily access textbooks in digital format, since many are not available. And she also has to negotiate with professors to have these accommodations recognized. And as for the training of professionals, a major issue in Italy is the lack of specific training on DCD across several sectors. This concerns not only teachers, but also healthcare professionals, university staff, and employment services. Many professionals still receive little or no formal education on DCD during their academic training or professional preparation. As a result, knowledge of DCD remains limited and the condition is often misunderstood, underestimated, or confused with other conditions. And this has important consequences on everyday practice because teachers may misinterpret motor and organizational difficulties as lack of effort or poor motivation. Healthcare professionals may overlook DCD or delay referral for assessment. University staff may be unfamiliar with appropriate accommodations, and employment services may not recognize the impact of DCD on access to work and workplace functioning. Overall, there is a clear gap between the real needs of individuals with DCD and the level of professional training and awareness available in many settings. In this field, AIDEE plays an important role by contributing to professional training through conferences, courses, and the dissemination of validated tools. Our president, Letizia Sabadini, developed the APCM2 assessment tool, widely used in Italy alongside the movement ABC, to assess praxis and motor coordination skills. Besides, she created the Sabadini method based on a multi-systemic and integrated approach. This shows that expertise already exists in Italy. The challenge is to make it systematically accessible. And as for the driving license, because before I saw that you were showing the permis de conduire, and we can say that in Italy there are no specific pathways for individuals with DCD to obtain a driving license. If they have a comorbidity, such as a recognized learning disorder, they may qualify for extra time, but only during the written theory exam. On the other hand, if there are significant comorbidities that fall under the Law 104, which, as I said before, regulates disability, individuals can access broader adaptations such as modified vehicles or additional supports tailored to their needs. This reflects an important and broader issue. That is, adulthood is not included in a system of care. And as for the public and political awareness, DCD remains largely unknown to the general public and policymakers. Awareness is still limited, and the condition is often misunderstood or underestimated, despite its significant impact on education, daily functioning, mental health, and long-term quality of life. It is not yet recognized as a priority in public health or education policies. As a result, it receives limited attention, insufficient dedicated resources, and little strategic planning at national level. Policies tend to focus on other neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, which receive greater visibility, recognition, and structural support, while DCD still remains invisible. So many families become the main advocates for their children, often having to explain their condition repeatedly and request support that should already be available. Overall, increasing public and political awareness is essential if you want DCD to move from an invisible condition to a recognized social and educational priority. A field where our association also plays an important role is research. In Italy, research exists but remains limited, especially regarding adult outcomes, long-term trajectories, and impact on quality of life. In this context, AIDEE plays a role in promoting, supporting research activities. Currently, our association is involved in ongoing research projects focusing on joint hypermobility, which you know is very common in dyspraxia, sensory over-responsivity, and the assessment of adaptive functioning in relation to motor and praxis difficulties by using the ABAS-3 test to better understand the relationship between motor coordination difficulties and adaptive functioning, particularly in everyday tasks. I can say that in talking about the mission
S'il vous plaît, on va donner la parole maintenant à Sharon Lane, et puis comme ça vous pourrez revenir après, on pourra un petit peu comparer les expériences et puis surtout les propositions que vous pouvez faire d'un pays à l'autre. Sharon, je vous laisse la parole pour vous présenter votre association, et puis voilà, déjà pouvoir commenter un petit peu cette enquête, et puis après on pourra parler un petit peu des pistes d'amélioration qu'on pourrait proposer les uns et les autres.
Merci, Vincent. I'd like to thank Vincent and Nathalie for the opportunity to be here today, and to thank all of you for your interest in this subject and for coming along today as well. And I hope that the information that we can share with you is of some benefit to you. So I am the CEO of Dyspraxia DCD Ireland. We are a national organisation, a national charity, and a company limited by guarantee. The organisation was established 30 years ago by parents of children with DCD, who I think we can all agree with is very misunderstood, very invisible, and certainly at the time there were no other support structures within Ireland. So the organisation remained very small up until 2020, when I came along. Not saying it was me, but it was a coincidence. What happened at the time actually was the COVID hit. So the organisation had to look at itself and how it was supporting people. There was only one full-time person, which was the CEO, so it sounds like a lovely title, but there's no staff or anything else. There was one part-time administration officer, and then a board of management that were volunteers, and some parents who were volunteers as well. But there was local support groups, grassroots community support groups around the country. That's what it looked like before COVID. When COVID hit, of course, these grassroots organisations could not meet in person. We were contacted, I had only just started, and we were contacted by a university who were struggling to find placements for their occupational therapy students. These were all graduate students. So between us, we developed a program which focused on telehealth and the delivery of occupational therapy across telehealth. So why occupational therapy? Because in Ireland, the occupational therapist is the predominant diagnostic clinician when it comes to a DCD diagnosis. So we would also have pediatricians, psychologists, and neurologists, but the occupational therapist is normally the person who conducts the first 3 stages of the diagnostic assessment, and then it would be signed off by either a neurologist, a psychologist, or a family GP for the 4th stage to rule out any other underlying conditions. So we had been, as an organisation, trying our hardest to educate occupational therapists and other clinicians. This was a wonderful opportunity for us to work with a large university to take on graduate student occupational therapists and to provide them with training in telehealth under supervision. So that is what we did for 2 years, and then we were funded by the government to expand that program across the country. So we now have 4 occupational therapists who work in different regions, and we will soon be taking on another occupational therapist. So that is what we call our POTS program, Partnering in Occupational Therapy Telehealth Services, and providing student placements across the country. It's worked very well because Ireland has some very remote areas. The services in Ireland, I think, as with many other countries, are very limited and very restricted. We don't have enough clinicians to provide assessments and follow-on supports. Depending on the region of the country that you live in, it may take anywhere between a year to 4 years to get a diagnostic assessment for your child in the public health system. We are now finding that the private health system is experiencing long waiting lists as well. So there is an issue there, and telehealth as a model, obviously the initial diagnostic assessment is undertaken in person, but follow-on supports can be carried out in the child's own home, in their own environment, and with reduced travel time and appointment waiting time. It's actually providing a really important service in our country. So apart from that, what we looked at was the person holistically. What did the person need and what did their family need? And what we often found was that the diagnostic process for a parent can be quite distressing, and particularly when a child receives a confirmation of diagnosis. the parent very often moves straight into fix-it mode. What do I need from my child? How do I fix this? As a parent myself of 2 young adults who are neurodivergent, I learned from my own experience that there's a piece of work there that you need to do in terms of grief and in terms of acknowledging that perhaps the life you had planned in your mind for this child was not necessarily the life that they were going to have, but being able to acknowledge that it was going to be another type of journey, and one I can say from my heart is a very special one, and one that I have been honored to travel with my children on. So we set up a counseling service to support families, and then we initially to support parents, and then followed on to support adults with a diagnosis. And I won't go into the whole mental health space of it, but certainly in Ireland, and I'm sure everywhere else, the later a person gets a diagnosis, the later they have an understanding of the condition, the higher the risk of impact in terms of mental health. So things like anxiety, depression, exclusion, whether it's self or by others, lack of employment, underemployment, all of these impact on a person's mental health. So we have a strong mental health support service. We also have a very, very focused and specific educational program for clinicians. So the first one that we set up was best practice in diagnostic assessment and report writing. And again, because there was such a variety of reports coming in that did not support the child adequately and did not provide enough information that the family could bring to the school or to other services to ensure that the child received the assistive technology or time in exams or whatever else they were looking for. And that has been running for over 3 years. All of our programs are online, by the way. And we have trained over 350 clinicians so far, mainly from Ireland and the UK, but I think there has been a couple from perhaps, I'm not sure if it was the US or Canada. We have just started a wonderful new training program based on the adult diagnostic process. There is no adult assessment service in the public health system in Ireland. It is all privately funded. So for an adult who may be underemployed or unemployed, it's quite unachievable given the cost. So we are trying to develop we have done all the research, which I hope to provide some information on later on, but we have just started the training in adult diagnostic assessment pathways, and that again is teaching clinicians. So apart from that, we work obviously with a lot of lobbying and advocacy and education for parents, and whatever we can do. We do whatever people ask us to do. And we will be having our national conference on the 17th of October in Dublin, if anybody would like to come and visit. Is that okay? Thank you.
Bon, on va réserver notre billet d'avion pour aller à Dublin. J'avais une question à vous poser à toutes les deux sur le diagnostic. S'il y avait une mesure à prendre rapidement dans votre pays concernant le diagnostic des enfants, pour commencer, est-ce que ça serait quoi? Avancer le diagnostic précoce, le faire plus tôt? Est-ce que ça serait mieux aider financièrement les familles pour pouvoir y faire face, créer des structures, mieux former les professionnels? S'il y avait une mesure à prendre pour être plus efficace, Erika?
As I said, in Italy, diagnosis is carried out by child neuropsychiatrists, psychologists, and in public services usually, or accredited centers. But early identification is difficult because of long waiting lists. So this is actually a big problem. And as I said, usually children, not very. Also, young children are discharged very quickly because there aren't places available.
Mais du coup, quelle serait la mesure prioritaire à prendre pour pallier ces difficultés?
Okay. The priority measure would be for us in Italy to the formal recognition of DCD within national health education and social policies, and early identification and timely diagnosis, a standardized diagnosis nationwide, and equal access to rehabilitation. And a crucial part of these reforms would concern education and the formal inclusion, as I said before, among specific learning disorders. And this should be very important, a very, very important reform, and we're working on it, because in this way students with DCD could benefit from all the measures and or the accommodations that students with specific learning disorder can use in school. So for us, this would be the most important reforms. And also, this reform should be extended also beyond childhood, ensuring support during transition to university, employment guidance, and inclusion and independent adult life. Because as I've said before, as I've already said, adults are almost invisible. There is no employment guidance or career guidance. So adulthood remains one of the most neglected areas. And so Italy does not
et justement, ça mène la question suivante, puis on posera ces mêmes questions à Sharon. Concernant le diagnostic des adultes, on a vu dans les retours de l'enquête que c'était quand même quelque chose de compliqué. Là aussi, qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait faire en priorité chez vous pour un peu débloquer la situation, améliorer la situation concernant le diagnostic des adultes là, pour cette fois?
Do you want me to answer the child or the adult, or both? I can say both for
Oui, allez-y.
Yeah. Okay.
Ouais.
So in Ireland, DCD is a recognised disability, and we do not generally screen for it in the public health system before the age of 7. So it's normally expected that the child would undergo at least 1 full year of primary schooling. However, we do not work with the child based on diagnosis. We work with the child based on need. So the model in Ireland is needs-based rather than diagnostic-based. Now, you do need an official diagnosis to receive exam accommodations, but you do not need an official diagnosis to receive supports within the school setting or any other setting. So there's quite a difference there. So the diagnostic piece of paper is necessary for exams for very official purposes, exams, applications for certain social welfare payments, the disability card if necessary, but the needs of the child are to be addressed from the time they become a parent. We're currently working with University College Dublin with some professors there in the Department of Early Childhood Development, looking at the identification of motor needs in very young children in preschool settings to see if we can identify any particular markers that may be relevant to DCD. But this piece of work is only starting. So that's, I guess, for children, what I would like to see are obviously more supports, more money put into this space to support children in accessing occupational therapy or other therapies. And for adults, certainly in Ireland, the adult space is one that we're looking at very, very strongly now. We started off, it's a very slow and long piece of work. We know that clinicians can undertake adult diagnoses, but I think there was a lot of perhaps I'm not sure of the word, a lot of hesitancy about, am I going to do this right? Maybe not a lot of confidence in the space, perhaps, because for such a long time, DCD was not acknowledged as being a condition that impacted on adults. There are still many myths that say that DCD is something that you grow out of, and it was called clumsy child syndrome, not clumsy person syndrome. So there's a lot of myths still in existence. So adults, we are really trying to work in this space, and by developing training programs, by working in research, that's what I'd like to see in the future. I'd like to see more research into the adult space and more understanding in general.
D'accord, je ne sais pas, Erika, si vous voulez, par rapport au diagnostic des adultes, est-ce que vous voulez compléter?
About?
Le diagnostic des adultes, est-ce que vous voulez compléter?
Yeah. In Italy, actually, adult diagnosis is very difficult. As I said before, they face a lot of challenges because there aren't standardized tests. Usually the diagnosis is carried out by neurologists or psychiatrists or neuropsychologists, but it's very difficult. And there's lack of structured transition into adulthood because there is no specific career guidance for this DCD, and also the support for autonomy is very limited. And many individuals with DCD still remains undiagnosed. And support for autonomy also is very limited. There are no structured life skill programs and limited community support. So as a result, daily life challenges remain largely unaddressed and at systemic level. And individuals may develop psychosocial difficulties, including anxiety, as we were saying before, low self-esteem, depression, and social isolation. So an important reform should be really focused on adult life, on their autonomy or diagnosis, career guidance, employment, because there is a major issue. It's a major issue here in Italy, at least. But from what I heard today, I think that it's a major issue also in other countries.
Tout à fait, ça on peut confirmer, hein, notamment concernant le diagnostic des adultes, que c'est une vraie difficulté. C'est pour ça que, modestement, nous essayons de faire évoluer les choses déjà en faisant cette enquête pour savoir un petit peu comment ça se passe actuellement, pour ensuite pouvoir améliorer, par exemple, la formation des médecins. Mais nous avions mené une enquête dans une région en France, il y a quelques années, qui montrait que 100% des adultes questionnés lors de cette enquête auraient aimé avoir un endroit unique pour rencontrer différents professionnels pour faire des bilans afin de poser un éventuel diagnostic. Alors qu'en fait, aujourd'hui, les adultes doivent aller d'un professionnel à l'autre s'ils existent. Et c'est une vraie difficulté. Donc ça, c'est un souhait de notre association, c'est d'avancer sur cette question-là, d'avancer sur la question du diagnostic des adolescents, parce qu'en France, on a la chance, il faut quand même le reconnaître, d'avoir la mise en place des plateformes de coordination et d'orientation, au départ pour les 0-6 ans, ensuite pour les 7-12 ans, mais qu'est-ce qu'on fait pour les 13 ans et plus où là, c'est une vraie difficulté, des enfants, des ados qui n'ont pas droit à l'accès à ces services, et pour lesquels de nombreuses familles sont en grande difficulté pour financer des bilans. On retrouve des chiffres à peu près similaires par rapport à l'enquête qu'on a menée, avec aussi de grandes disparités selon les territoires et selon les professionnels. J'avais une question par rapport à l'éducation. On a vu qu'au niveau matériel, ordinateur, tablette, l'accès pouvait se faire, alors parfois s'il y avait reconnaissance de handicap, mais concernant la question spécifique des aménagements pour les examens, qu'est-ce qu'il existe précisément chez vous et qu'est-ce qui pourrait être amélioré encore dans les aménagements aux examens? Parce que nous, en France, on remarque une grande disparité entre les territoires, parfois des aménagements qui sont accordés dans certains départements, et puis dans le département d'à côté, c'est pas possible, par exemple, de bénéficier d'un logiciel particulier sur son ordinateur. Voilà. Est-ce que vous rencontrez, vous, ces mêmes difficultés? Quelles seraient vos propositions pour améliorer cette question de l'aménagement aux examens? Je ne sais pas qui veut commencer. Sharon?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think we all have issues in terms of accommodations and exams. So we recently had a little bit of a win in Ireland where we were able to get access to an additional 10 minutes per person for written exams. Now, if you know the writing speed of a person with DCD, 10 minutes is nowhere near sufficient enough. So we are continuing to campaign on that side, but at least it's 10 minutes. We have movement breaks, we have access to scribes. There's a lot of technology that can be utilized in exams. There are quiet rooms. It really depends, again, on the need of the individual. But in order to access those technologies and those supports, yes, you do have to have an official diagnostic report that recommends that. Within the school settings, I think we've seen marvelous improvements within the last few years. So a child can use a laptop in school every day. And we would have a number of children who are exiting the school system, the secondary school system, typing at well over 100 words a minute, which in itself is, it's a skill that they've developed during their school education. We would have, as well, there would be in the third level system a lot of supports there. The most difficult phase in education is the secondary school system for children. The primary school system, very supportive. Again, it's a smaller system. The schools tend to be smaller. You have one teacher for all subjects. You're not moving from classroom to classroom. The secondary school system, huge school, moving everywhere, bags, lockers, floors, more difficult to plan. And then third level education, yes, you do have to have a support structure around you, but every third level system has disability officers there to hopefully support you. I think one of the things that we are really focusing on in Ireland in general at the moment is an entire review of our secondary education system, and we are looking at it from the universal design principles. So not that a child with a disability should have to fit into a certain structure, but the structure itself. And it goes back to, all those, I think it was Marie this morning talked about the environment in which we exist and the environment in which we thrive. So looking at our education system, Ireland has a very rigid education system in general, and we are looking at how do we modify that system. So instead of saying to the young person with DCD, okay, you must set an alarm on your watch for 10 minutes before class starts so you can go to your locker and get your books ready and prepare everything. We say to the school, can you ring the alarm bell 10 minutes earlier so every child can go to their locker and get ready for school? So not one child, don't send that one child out for a movement break with a note, get the whole class up, get the whole class moving. So that's what we're looking at doing, and that's how we ourselves have started trying to educate teachers in the past few years. Before that, we would have said, yes, send them out for movement break. Now we say, no, get the whole class up and moving. So.
D'accord. Erika, en Italie, concernant les aménagements d'examen, qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait améliorer?
Okay, right now, during exams, students may be granted 30% extra time or a 30% reduction in the exam workload. However, for many individuals with dyspraxia, this is often insufficient because we know that slow processing speed and reduced execution speed are among the major challenges associated with the condition. They can use laptops, concept maps. They can benefit from an educational plan if they are protected by the Italian law 170, which means they have a comorbidity with a specific learning disorder, or if they have a comorbidity with a disability, they are protected with by the Italian law 104, which regulates disability. But the major reform, as I've said before, is that dyspraxia would be recognized as a specific learning disorder, because formal recognition within the educational system would allow students with ECD to receive appropriate support without depending on comorbidities. And so this is what I think should be improved and implemented. And also the compliance, teachers' compliance, because as I said before, we need specific training for teachers, but we need especially that they applies all the measures the students need, because there's a gap between what is written in the educational plan and what it's really applied. So we need more empathy sometimes from teachers, from schools. We need a real inclusion, because schools today, despite our efforts as association and despite our training, still remains a not inclusive environment.
D'accord. Donc en fait, je relève que, mais ça a été dit par l'enquête, hein, que le TDC tout seul, finalement, a beaucoup de mal à exister. Et du coup, est-ce que c'est un peu comme en France, où on a un peu tendance à englober tout ça dans le terme 10, et où on a du mal à faire ressortir justement la spécificité de ce trouble. Et du coup, comment faire pour la faire ressortir? Est-ce que vous avez des propositions dans vos pays qui pourraient peut-être servir à d'autres? Sharon, je dois réagir.
I think that's a double-edged sword in a way. What we have found is, with the emergence of language and understanding of neurodivergency and neurodivergent people, DCD in Ireland certainly has been able to almost cling on to the tailcoat of that label, and its profile has been raised, because neurodivergence and neurodivergent people has become much more of an understood space in our country. And now, not saying we're anywhere near the level of autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, but it has certainly raised our profile, I think. But in terms of us as a stand-alone organisation, trying to get the understanding of what DCD is has been very, very difficult, because first of all, in our country, our name, we intertwine the two words, DCD and dyspraxia. So DCD, obviously the clinical terminology, dyspraxia, the layman's term. So if we tried, because of even the name of our organisation, we said to people in Ireland, shall we call the organisation DCD Ireland? And they said, no, we won't call it that, because DCD does not adequately outline all of the impacts of the condition on the individual. It focuses, if you look at the DSM-5, it is very much focused on the gross and fine motor skills of the individual, whereas families and parents and adults with DCD were saying it's much, much more than that. It's the DSM-5 that needs to change, not the name of the condition. So that's why, I guess, for us, it's there's a bit of difficulty even in getting people to understand what the condition is. Our parents will come to us and say, I have a diagnosis of dyspraxia for my child. And we say, no, you have a diagnosis of DCD for your child. You can't get a diagnosis. There is no such thing as a diagnosis of dyspraxia in our country. So even trying to understand those components of it can create enough difficulty without then, how do we explain the rest of it to people? So what we do is we really just look at needs. We pick on some subjects, and things like the driving instructors, that's a really important subject. For younger children, it's things like bicycle riding, that comes up as a big subject. Sports is a big subject. We can link that to things like obesity and inclusion, and that's how we try and increase the knowledge and prevalence of DCD, but on its own, it's really difficult. Sorry, I'm not sure if that really answered the question.
D'accord, très bien. Alors, vous avez abordé différents sujets. Il y a une question dont on avait parlé lors d'un colloque au ministère de la Santé à Paris en 2022, c'était l'accompagnement à la vie sociale. Est-ce qu'il existe dans vos pays des structures comme on peut avoir en France le service d'accompagnement à la vie sociale ou d'autres services de ce type? Est-ce qu'il y a des services de ce type qui existent comme ça en Italie? Est-ce que s'ils existent, ils sont accessibles aux personnes avec TDC?
No, as I've said before, there is no services. There are no services to accompany adults. So that's why, as I've said, adults are really invisible. So there is no career guidance or employment guidance, problems with diagnosis. That's why, as I've said, adults often develop psychological issues. They're isolated. They often have problems at work because employers are not trained. They don't know Dyspraxia. I mean, many teachers don't know Dyspraxia, so you can imagine if employers know Dyspraxia or DCD. So no, there aren't services can accompany adults with DCD in Italy, at least in Italy. Even if the situation is not same with every person, because it is different from a person to another. Maybe there are some adults that can navigate their lives without many problems. For example, I know a friend of mine, she is dyspraxic, but she's a nurse. She found a way, even if she wasn't diagnosed. She was diagnosed by our president, Dr. Sabatini, when she was an adult. But she wasn't. She didn't have a lot of problems. Her dyspraxia wasn't so important and so severe. So some adults find a way. Others have a lot of problems in driving, at work, in their social life, so in their autonomy. So unfortunately, we don't have any service.
D'accord. Et en Irlande, Sharon, est-ce qu'il y a de ce type de service?
They would not be Dyspraxia or DCD specific, but they would focus on a range of supports for people who are neurodivergent, looking at employment. There would be education, sort of different pathways out of education as well, not in terms of emotional, social supports, unless they were set up by people themselves. So mainly most of the social supports would be support groups set up by people, adults with DCD. But through the formal system, you would have funded agencies who are generally not-for-profits, who would have employment agencies, national learning networks, so you can do different CCQ qualifications as opposed to a college qualification. And so just different pathways into where you would like to go into the future. But the big problem is loneliness and lack of social connection and mental health difficulties, because I think the employer piece is really, really important. Employers just do not know how to support somebody with DCD, and as a result, people with DCD can be victimized within the workplace. They're very vulnerable, they can lose their jobs, and they can be entirely under-resourced and under-supported. Yeah.
Votre intervention permet d'enchaîner justement sur la question de l'emploi. Est-ce qu'il y a des structures, je reviens encore aux structures, comme en France, on a une structure qui peut aménager des postes de travail. Et puis, est-ce qu'il y a nous en France, par exemple, pour les entreprises de plus de 20 salariés, obligation d'embaucher 6% de travailleurs en situation de handicap? Est-ce que c'est donc dont peuvent bénéficier des adultes dyspraxiques qui ont une reconnaissance, justement, de travailleurs handicapés? Est-ce qu'il existe ce type de formule chez vous? Qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait aussi améliorer dans le domaine de l'emploi, finalement?
I think that's European Union directives that all countries, all government departments have to abide by. It certainly is in Ireland as well. The 6%, it's increased from, I think it was originally 2, then it went to 3, so it's increased gradually over the years. Does it happen in government departments? I highly doubt it, to be honest with you, because they're, and I'm even thinking of the Department of, I'm not going to say which department, I'm in the European Union, but there are certain government departments that definitely don't follow their own guidelines in terms of employing people with disability. So I would say, although it's there in theory, it doesn't happen in practice. It's really frustrating. It's very, very annoying. It's something that we're continuing to really try and advocate for. The Irish government, because of our very low rate of disability employment, has significantly increased grants to employers to make workplaces more accessible, both in the sense of adaptations for physical disabilities, but also in terms of education for staff and employers to support people with disabilities, which may be neurodivergent disabilities, learning disabilities. We have one of the lowest rates of take-up in the European Union. I think we've got an extremely high disparity between the general population and people with disabilities in the workforce. So we have a lot to do in our country.
D'accord, merci. Erika, concernant l'emploi des personnes avec TDC en Italie, est-ce qu'il y a une possibilité de bénéficier d'aménagements? Est-ce qu'il y a des organismes qui peuvent faciliter l'accès, le maintien dans l'emploi?
Yeah, we don't have structures, this kind of structures in Italy, and several aspects could be improved to promote real inclusion and equal opportunities for adults with ECD. First of all, greater awareness is needed among employers. I'm sure that could help among managers or colleagues. DCD, as I said before, is still little known in the workplace, and difficulties with the organization, speed, underwriting, coordination, multitasking may be misunderstood as I can say, a lack of competence or motivation. And secondly, more individualized workplace accommodation should be available, such as flexible organization of tasks, additional time for certain activities, use of digital tools and assistive technology, and adaptive workstations if needed. And I think that's important also, clearer written in structures and structures routines, because we know that routines are really important with the individuals with ECD, and I can tell because my daughter really needs them. And another important area is the access to career guidance and employment support services that understand the specific profile of an individual with ECD, including challenges and strengths, and also training for human resources departments and occupational health professionals will also be valuable, so that DCD can be recognized appropriately and support measures can be implemented. And finally, employment policies should move toward a more functional and need-based approach, ensuring support based on real difficulties in daily work, even when individuals do not fall within a formal disability category, because only disability categories are protected in Italy. So the key priority is to move, as I said before, from invisibility to practical inclusion, allowing adults with ECD to fully express their abilities also in the workplace.
Avant de donner à la salle la possibilité de vous poser des questions, j'avais une autre question concernant la recherche. Cet après-midi, nous allons avoir des présentations de travaux de recherche. Donc, nous allons laisser les chercheurs s'exprimer, les chercheurs et chercheuses surtout, s'exprimer. Mais vous, en tant qu'association, Est-ce que vous avez une attente particulière en matière de recherche? Est-ce qu'il y a des travaux de recherche en tant qu'usager, que représentant associatif, vous souhaiteriez voir émerger? Qu'est-ce qu'il faudra faire en matière de recherche là?
Yes, I think if I had a magic wand, I'd like to see research across all ages and spaces in relation to DCD. It's particularly in our country, in Ireland, it is under-researched. There have been some improvements, and we do have some amazing clinicians. Dr. Dorothy Armstrong, Dr. Anya O'Dea, they both specialise in DCD in Ireland. We have some very good connections with universities. Dr. Melissa Prunty is a specialist in handwriting. She works with us as well. But there are not a lot of avenues for funding for research. That's where we are hampered very often. I certainly think that we would all benefit from working together and learning together across Europe. I know there's a very strong Dyspraxia Association of Europe, and I'd love to see a similar association across Europe for DCD. I think we would, there's always strength in numbers, and research across Europe, comparative research, would be very beneficial to us all. We've undertaken, I'm not sure if you've seen a piece of research that came out of Australia a few years ago. The UK replicated that, and we've subsequently replicated that as well. So that's good to have a comparison across different countries, but we definitely don't have enough of that. And in terms of general research, the piece that we're working on at the moment in relation to motor skill identification in preschool children, I think is very important, and continuing research into the adult DCD space, particularly for us looking at later in life. So we work across the trajectory of life, but now if we could start looking at the older years, say 65, 70 plus, for those people who were never diagnosed with DCD, and as we know, as people age, the fall hazards, etc., we have no idea on what's happening in that space for people who were never diagnosed many, many years ago.
D'accord, merci. Erika, en matière de recherche, est-ce qu'il y aura un domaine, une piste particulière à creuser, selon vous?
Yeah, as I've already said, our association is currently involved in ongoing research projects. But first of all, we would like to see more research on adults with DCD, as these remain one of the most neglected areas. And in fact, most available studies still focus mainly on childhood, while many challenges continue into adolescence, university years, employment, and adult life. We would also welcome more research on the relationship between DCD and mental health and emotional well-being, since we have seen that many adults and adolescents with DCD have a lot of psychological issues, also anxiety. The relation between DCD and anxiety, self-esteem, social participation, executive functioning, and daily organization, sensory processing differences, because this is a very important area and we're working on it. Joint hypermobility and fatigue and stress in everyday functioning. And I think that another important priority in research is research on effective interventions across lifespan, including not only motor rehabilitation, but also educational support, workplace inclusion, autonomy, and quality of life. And we also believe there is a need for a better data collection and more cross-national studies to understand differences between countries and identify best practice. And as an association, we value collaboration between researchers, clinicians, families, and people with lived experience. So research should not only study individuals with DCD, but also, I think, I could say, listen to them.
D'accord, donc ça fait une grande liste quand même, hein, de travaux à mener. Donc on a besoin de beaucoup de chercheuses et chercheurs. Est-ce qu'en Italie, est-ce qu'en Irlande, on sait ce que deviennent les jeunes? Est-ce qu'on a une idée un petit peu sur les parcours, ou est-ce qu'on est dans le flou?
We know that within Ireland, we track the number of students with disability entering third-level education. And so that we know that in University College Cork, which would be one of the larger universities in Ireland, the highest number of students with a disclosed disability in 2021 and 2 was DCD. So we know that a lot of our students are getting into university, but then we know that a lot of them are dropping out of university because of pressures, lack of support, and because they don't have a support structure around them, and it's too hard to work in that environment. So in the past number of years, there have been organisations set up to work with university students in particular to try and help them finish their qualifications. And then there are particular organisations that will help them to get paid internships within companies that understand, so it's a place and support model around them, as opposed to the old traditional model of you drop out and we'll put you in a training program and you can stay there for a number of years and then you might get a job or you might just go off and do more training. Now it's turned and it's employment with support around the person. And that is working much more effectively than the older models did. It really, I think, depends on the individual as well. So we know, again, looking at the outcomes from universities in Ireland, that the students entering into university with disclosed DCD tend to go primarily for the caring professions, engineering, and technology. They would be the three main areas that they would go for in terms of subject selection. That's great, but the issue is how many then conclude, and we do not have those numbers because they're not tracking them the whole way through. And but we know as an organisation that they're falling out in quite high numbers. So that's the problem. And then afterwards, where do they go after that? Again, there are support structures. It just depends on the individual and what they want to do, what their hopes are for their future, and how we can support them in that. Thank you.
Merci Sharon. Et en Italie, Erika, est-ce qu'on sait ce que deviennent les jeunes ou pas? Est-ce qu'ils sont dans la nature sans savoir un peu ce qu'ils deviennent, leur parcours?
As I said, adults with ECD are largely invisible within public services. There are very few specific pathways for diagnosis, rehabilitation, employment support, or independent living in adulthood. So many adults remain undiagnosed or unsupported and often have to rely on personal strategies, family support, or private services. And some students, I can say many students maybe, have difficulty to enter universities. Others also leave university because of the difficulties they face, I talked about before, while many adults experience significant barriers in the workplace. Research on adults with ECD is very limited, which makes recognition and service development even more difficult. So what happens to adults with ECD is that they can face a lot of challenges. Of course, this varies from person to person, but there are a lot of challenges for sure, because they are underdiagnosed or because they can find support in university or at work. And we, as association, we are trying to work on this, to train more professionals, to avoid these, especially significant differences between different regions in our country. For example, the north and the south of Italy, because there are a lot of differences. In northern Italy, Dyspraxia is more diagnosed than in southern Italy. And so students or employees or in general individuals with DCD in southern Italy face more problems, more challenges.
D'accord. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions dans la salle? On a encore 10 minutes. Oui, allez-y.
Je suis Eric de Dyspraxie Alsace. Vous avez évoqué en Italie et en Irlande la lenteur du diagnostic, et c'est vrai également en France, où on met parfois plusieurs années à être diagnostiqué, et ça empêche, en tout cas en France, d'avoir des aménagements rapides à l'école. Et on sait très bien que plus vite on a des aménagements, et mieux c'est. Pour autant, j'ai entendu en Italie que vous aviez la possibilité d'avoir un diagnostic privé qui vous permettait, fait dans le privé, donc qui vous permettait d'avancer un peu plus vite. Et puis en Irlande, que vous partiez des besoins et donc pas forcément du diagnostic. Et puis aussi que vous aviez un diagnostic ou un pré-diagnostic qui pouvait être fait par un ergothérapeute. Mais concrètement, à l'école, comment vous faites, tant que vous n'avez pas de diagnostic, pour avoir une aide, un soutien des professeurs? Comment ça se passe? Est-ce que c'est de gré à gré avec l'école ou avec les professeurs, ou est-ce qu'il y a quelque chose d'un peu plus officiel?
Alors, qui veut répondre en premier? Erika?
Okay, yes, you have to speak individually with schools and you have to explain. Usually parents have to do this. As I said, they have to explain repeatedly which are their children's needs. And you have to fight many times with schools. You have to explain to teachers what is dyspraxia, because they don't know dyspraxia. You have to explain that dyspraxic individuals can have different needs if we compare them to students with learning specific disorders. Sometimes some accommodations, they can use the same accommodations, for example, laptops or concept maps, but sometimes the dyspraxic students need specific accommodations. For example, many dyspraxic students can't use mind maps. Now we can, all over the internet, we can find mind maps, you know, but they're not, they don't work so well with dyspraxic students. At least with the students that we know, they prefer linear concept maps. So because they have problems, they have issues on plannings, on planification. And this is very difficult to explain to teachers because they think that all students are equal, are the same. Sorry, so they don't apply the measures we ask so consistently. And this is very challenging, frustrating sometimes. But yes, you have to speak individually. You have to bring them the certification, and that the school can keep. So they write an educational plan with all the measures. But as I said, these measures are not always applied, and so we have to fight a lot in schools. Parents have to fight a lot. That's why parents need to be trained. In fact, as association, we train parents. We support families in this kind of problems in school, and sometimes parents can talk with the school together with the tutors or professionals, but it's not so easy.
D'accord. Sharon, et puis après on donnera la parole à Nathalie.
I absolutely agree with Erika. It's very much a fight with the school situation in Ireland as well, even though you don't have to have that diagnostic report. But teachers do not have to undergo disability training. It's an elective within teacher training in Ireland, unless you work in a special autism unit. So there are a lot of teachers who have no understanding of what many disabilities are, let alone DCD, and there are many teachers who do not feel that it is their responsibility to need to know these things, which is even worse again. So we do a lot of work with schools, we advocate, and as Erika pointed out, it's really important that we teach parents how to advocate for their child, to ensure that they are included, they and their child are included in the co-production of the education support plan within the school, to ensure that they meet with the school on a regular basis, to review the plan and to keep communication open. But look, it is an ongoing challenge, and it's on a per child basis.
Alors en France, c'est vrai qu'il y a eu beaucoup de retard qui a été pris. Là, il y a quand même un changement, c'est-à-dire que dans la formation et dans l'appréhension de tout ça, alors c'est en cours, on est en plein dedans, je ne sais pas du tout comment ça va évoluer et comment les personnes vont pouvoir s'en emparer. Il y a quand même 2 ou 3 axes qui sont en train d'évoluer, c'est-à-dire que sur la formation des enseignants, des AESH et aussi des EduxP dans le médico-social, il y a de plus en plus de formations sur les TND et pas tant finalement sur le trouble, mais sur les répercussions du trouble et sur tout ce qu'on va pouvoir proposer de mise en place pour accessibiliser. Et en fait, on va être pas de moins en moins, mais sur la compensation, mais plus sur l'accessibilisation.
J'avais une dernière question à Erika et à Sharon, ma réponse très courte. Ça ne va pas être facile, parce que la question peut être complexe. Mais est-ce que, étant donné que là on est au Parlement européen, est-ce que vous pensez qu'au niveau européen, au niveau de l'Union européenne, il pourrait y avoir un travail de fait pour soit harmoniser les pratiques, soit progresser dans certains domaines, ou est-ce qu'il ne faut rien attendre de l'Europe? Question un petit peu provocatrice. Erika, si vous voulez, très courte, la réponse.
Yes, from Europe, we would first welcome a stronger recognition of DCD as a significant neurodevelopmental condition across the lifespan within health, education, employment and social inclusion policies. We would also hope for shared recommendations and common frameworks so that member states can strengthen their national systems in key areas such as early identification, diagnostic pathways, inclusive education, transition to adulthood, and access to employment. And another important priority, as we said, is support for research and innovation. So I think that Europe could encourage collaborative international projects to promote knowledge, data collection, and evidence-based interventions. And especially research, the research should include adult outcomes, mental health, quality of life, sensory processing, gender differences, because we have to think about it, and also aging with DCD, because this would be a problem. We have to think about aging with DCD and effective long-term support strategies. And we would also welcome initiatives focused on training and awareness because, as we said, many teachers and professionals still have and employers limited knowledge of DCD. So European training programs and awareness campaigns could help improve recognition and reduce the stigmas. And further priority is the exchange of good practices between countries. So Europe offers a valuable opportunity for national association. So professional, in order for professional researchers and institutions to learn from one another and share successful model of support. Finally, Europe can play a key role in reducing inequalities between countries, helping to ensure that children and adults with DCD have comparable opportunities regardless of where they live. From our perspective, the Italian perspective, European support can also encourage national reforms and help strengthen recognition of DCD within domestic systems. What does it mean? We don't expect Europe to replace, of course, national responsibilities. Rather, we hope Europe can provide leadership, coordination, and shared standards so that no person with DCD is left behind because of geographical differences.
Merci Erika. Sharon, pour conclure, au niveau européen, qu'est-ce qu'on peut attendre?
I agree with everything Erika said there, so I won't repeat any of that. I think that the European Union needs to work faster. I think it's far too slow in what it's doing, and it's not keeping up with the needs of the people that it serves. And I also think it has a very important role to play in the protection of diversity, equality and inclusion initiatives. We certainly know that in Ireland we're impacted by, say, American funding for research, where we're told that we can't include certain people in that research because of the regulations coming from America. I think there needs to be a big pushback from the European Union on that to protect us all in the future from those types of people and their thinking. Thank you.